last time I spoke with today's guest, the world felt very different. It was early 2022. We were focused on how digital identity could help create a trusted foundation for online transactions. Back then, the conversation revolved around improving user experience and reducing fraud. But since that conversation, generative AI arrived, and with it, a whole new set of challenges and opportunities for digital identity verification. Fast forward to 2025, deepfakes are now becoming indistinguishable from reality, synthetic identities are harder to detect, and in one of the more surreal twists, Mark Zuckerberg has publicly suggested that Facebook friends lists could soon be a blend of AI personas and real people. So these shifts are raising urgent questions about trust, authenticity, and how we verify who or what is on the other side of the screen. So in today's episode, I want to reconnect with Philipp Pointner, Chief of Digital Identity at Jumio. And together we're going to explore what's changed since our last conversation. It was a short span of time, but so much has changed. And also explore what does this mean for businesses navigating this new reality? What does it mean for ourselves as users? And also unpack how AI is being used to enhance, not erode, identity verification. We see our news feeds full of so many horror stories, but I do think there's so much more to be excited about. We'll also discuss why biometrics are now ubiquitous. They are front and centre in everything from border control to financial services, and how regulations are evolving in response to some of the emerging threats. But it's not all about fraud prevention. Digital identity has quietly become a further growth driver, one that streamlines onboarding, improves compliance, and delivers smoother customer experiences. I suspect most of your purchases within the last 7 days involved using your face from a smartphone. But for organisations, how do they walk that line between convenience and security? And what happens when that line starts to blur? Well, enough from me. It's time to officially give a very warm welcome back to my guest. So a massive warm welcome back to the show. Can you tell everyone listening who missed our previous conversation a little more about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. I'm Philipp Pointner, Chief of Digital Identity at Jumio. I'm a leader in the product management team, responsible for a part of what Jumio is doing, and very glad to be here. Very exciting.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. And just to set the stage, can you tell the listeners a little bit more about Jumio and how the digital identity landscape, how has that changed since we last spoke, in 2022, I think it was, because we've had the old generative AI explosion since then. But tell me how that space has evolved.
Yeah, so, Jumio, we help businesses understand who people are that they're interacting with, and also what is the risk that comes with interacting those individuals. So in part it is, fraud prevention, compliance regulations, KYC. I think the big shift, and you already mentioned it, is Gen AI, but Gen AI is really just a tool. What we've seen, and that's really the big one, is that fraud has gone from being kind of a lone wolf in the basement somewhere individual to really a syndicated operation where, people basically go into an office like it was their day job, and they have a stack of fake IDs on the table, and they're trying to open as many fake accounts as they possibly can with targets that they're given. And so, our customers are facing these large-scale, high sophisticated attacks that we just haven't seen just 3 years ago.
It's so true. And a few of them there. We're seeing deepfakes, synthetic identities. A few weeks ago, I think Zuckerberg said on a podcast he'd like our Facebook friends to be a mixture of AI profiles and human connections. And all these things are becoming more and more convincing by the day. It's difficult to make sense of what's real and what isn't sometimes. So how are businesses adapting their identity verification strategies in response to some of these changes?
It is very challenging. So number one is putting in more layers of risk detection. And so if you have, a check of the ID and the face and, an email risk, a phone risk, a device risk, or, even just corroborating the data with the database. These all help you because the fraudsters, they do make mistakes sometimes. And the more of these risk signals that you collect and process, the higher your chances are that you can find something. And the other big trend that we currently see is as a response, basically, of the industries to this new level of threat, the industries have understood that it's no longer every business for themselves against the fraudsters, but it's the entire industry plus their vendor landscape plus their regulators working together to combat fraud. And that means the collaboration on data exchanges and helping each other out, working on regulation together to effectively fight fraud in a more concerted effort.
And I'd also love to shine a light on the fact that many organizations are integrating digital identity solutions beyond just fraud prevention. So, again, at a time where there's a big focus on ROI and tangible difference and measurable difference and value generating things that businesses can add with technology, what are some of those business benefits that you're seeing, particularly in maybe onboarding and customer experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's, so whether you're regulated or not, whether there's, sometimes it's just that you have a property risk or something that you run some assets. When you need to know who people are on the internet for real, and that could be for, hundreds of different use cases, you don't want to introduce friction to that process, right? So you want to go with the most lightweight and easiest possible way you can achieve that. And that has evolved as well over time. And so people, don't necessarily need to reach for their wallets anymore and pull out their driver's licenses. There's a lot that can be done, that helps users identify themselves with reusable identity, digital identities. But it's when you want to capture someone's data, you can use some of that. So there's really many different ways on how what used to be just for fraud prevention can actually help you create a really good user experience.
And of course, regulatory requirements around identity verification seem to be evolving very quickly too. I can even board a plane with just my face now. So what changes should businesses be paying attention to in not just 2025, but maybe as we look towards 2026 too?
So there's a couple trends we see. One is that regulation becomes more prescriptive. And so you have to do this and this and this. That's how you do your KYC process, right? And another trend that we see is regulation that is upcoming that will allow the use of national digital identities that are being issued everywhere. So we got this huge push in Europe. The UK is now making this big movement towards adopting the MDL standard mobile driver's licenses. We see mobile driver's licenses in the US more, coming from the tech space, the operating system providers, enabling support for it. And so allowing businesses to make use of that as a default is a big regulatory push that is in the works right now. And regulation also is including more and more businesses and use cases. And so really it has become clear that anything around healthcare, anything around telco and SIM cards, these are areas that are just being, folded into that identity regulation that previously was really more for the financial sector.
And from a financial standpoint, what kind of impact can effective digital identity solutions have on reducing things like fraud-related losses, which are significant for most organizations now? But how does that help there?
So the digital identities, the truly, reusable digital identities, they have a lot of advantages. So one is it's really supposed to be low friction for the end users, and most of them are designed this way. So you'll get higher conversion rates, more happy customers to go through with the onboarding. You don't get any confusion about who it actually is that you're onboarding. So you get the cleanest possible data that you can have. You get some reusable information, but then you might still want to run a fresh, PEPs and sanction screening or other things that you need to do from a compliance standpoint. So not everything goes away. But most of the things where, data has been looked up and checked and all of these things basically become unnecessary. And then in theory, and we'll see how that works out over the next years, true digital identities should come with a much higher level of assurance and should eliminate a lot of the fraud vectors that are open today. And that in itself should hopefully help businesses to operate more effectively on their onboarding.
And there is a lot of hype around AI for good. And on the flip side of that, there's also a few warnings around the potential harms of AI. So I'm curious from your side and everything that you're seeing here, the good, the bad and the ugly. I'm curious, how is AI being used to strengthen, not undermine identity verification systems?
Well, I mean, let's start with the bad maybe for a second.
Yeah.
We've now seen when it comes to, generating ID documents or photos of ID documents, that they have reached a level of sophistication that the human eye cannot distinguish it anymore from a real document. And so if you don't have the forensic tools and the technology, I always say you need AI to fight AI nowadays. So you actually have to have the technology and the tools to effectively combat these generated IDs. The faces, the fonts, the layout of the cards, everything is perfect. So what that has done is similar to what happened in the 90s with, hacking and attacking websites, where suddenly you didn't have to have this lower level engineering knowledge. You could just run a script that someone else had done, and you had even tools, back then on CDs that you could buy in a shop to do these things. And so it basically commoditizes using these tools, and so everybody can now have their own fake ID made, and that's the problem that comes with it. It's that and the scale. So you have a CSV file, you have the data in there that you want to be on these IDs, and then you click a button and it creates 10,000 images, and you try them all against your target website, right? And it's just the scale of the operation that's really stunning and breathtaking. And when you talk about something like deepfake, for example, 2-3 years ago, we would see one a day and we would all get together and look at this. This is amazing. See how this, you can see it here in the eyes. You can see something here. Now we see thousands every day, and it's overwhelming. It's really interesting. But, and this is the good side of this, we are also using AI to build our own tools and advance our own algorithms and our own checks that we do in order to identify these fakes. And so the generation of training data supported by generative AI has come a long way. And so now we can say, hey, we have a problem with Bolivian driver's licenses that are, have a certain type of fraud or fake on them. And we can generate these images to then train on them and identify them and make the models better. And so it's really been a tool for the fraudsters, but it's also a tool for us on the other side. And we're in this arms race that is going to continue forever, but now there's a new toy for everybody.
And biometrics are playing a much bigger role in identity assurance since we last spoke. As I mentioned, whether it be boarding a plane or even passport control, it's things like facial recognition are rapidly being used when we're buying things from our smartphone. Again, the face or thumbprint or some form of biometrics is often used. So what's your view on how they're being adopted at scale now and where you've seen them being most effective?
Yeah, it's become ubiquitous, right? And so I think we owe this to the smartphone manufacturers and operating system developers, because showing our face as a security means to device has become so natural, and everybody knows how to do it. Everybody is doing it 100 times a day. And so this has made it very easy for also the security and identity verification companies to say, hey, we need to scan your face to give you access to the service. And the power of the face is when we do a proper liveness check, and there is many different techniques to achieve that. When you do a proper liveness test and you make sure that you're dealing with a live person and not a photo or a screen or something like that, it really poses a challenge for the fraudster. So are they going to show their own face? Well, that's very inconvenient, because if we catch them, then their own face is burned and we basically know what they look like. Asking someone else to use their face is also very challenging. You can scam people sometimes into doing that, but it's a very elaborate procedure and very, time expensive. And so that effective liveness detection, is one of the biggest deterrents that we have for the fraudsters to actually go away and try somewhere else.
And if we did look further ahead into the future, how do you see digital identity continue to evolve over the next few years? And equally, how are you preparing at Jumio to help shape that future too? What excites you about this space now?
The future is in reusable identity. I think that the entire industry knows that. And that means, on the one side, government issued EIDs. And so really something that the government hands out to their citizens, like the EU Digital Identity Wallet that is coming in Europe, but many other initiatives around the world. And our job there is going to be to seamlessly accept all of these different identities that people might bring to the table. So it becomes a bring your own identity kind of world. And the other piece is to make these identities as rich with data that then can be selectively shared. Meaning, today on your passport, there's your name and your date of birth and then the number, and that's good enough to say, yeah, we've identified this individual. In the future, hopefully you can share things like your registered address or your your social benefit status, or like the right to work, other things that are important for the transactions that you do online and that you conduct with businesses. And all of that can then selectively be shared. So not everything gets shared every time, but there is a meaningful request for data that the user can review and say, yeah, this makes sense. I want to share this with this business. And then it gets presented and shared out.
And we're talking about a very serious subject today, a subject that impacts every single person listening, including both you and I, and that is our identity. But I also suspect that you've picked up quite a few stories from your career in this space. It's an incredibly interesting and fascinating space. So if I was to ask you to look back at your career, what is the most funniest or interesting story that you've picked up along the way? I'm sure there's a few, some you can share, some you can't, but any you can?
So I'm going to out myself here a little bit. One of the interesting questions I always ask when I interview for product managers or product owners is, how did you end up in a product career? Because usually nobody gets up in the morning, gets out of bed and thinks, well, I think I should be a product manager. So usually people somehow slip into that role, and I'll tell you my story real brief. I was basically working as a customer support analyst. I, could write SQL queries, and I could, look at data and see things that are going on and surface certain patterns. And I was hired by a company to do exactly that. And then I started on my first day, and my boss came and he said, look, we hired you for this position, but really what I need is a product owner. And so your business card is going to say analyst, and your door sign is going to say analyst, but really I need you to kind of fulfill this role. And is that a problem? And I said, no, not at all. It's not a problem at all. And then I got, down to the IT department. I got my laptop. I went back to my desk, and the first thing I did, I Googled product owner because I had no idea what that is and what that does. And that was my start into my product career.
What a great story. Absolutely love it. And I suspect many will resonate with that. It's happened to us all at some point, I think. And for anyone listening, just wanting to dig a little bit deeper on the topic of identity and indeed the work that you're doing at Jumio, or connect with you or your team, where would you like to point everyone?
Yeah, find us at jumio.com. And we got, brand new content on the website as well. So check it out. And that's the best way to get in contact with us.
Well, I think when it comes to identity, it's something that, as I said, impacts each and every one of us. But what I love today is digging a little bit deeper in that, the business impact of identity, the changing regulatory landscape, and the financial impact that all these things have on identity, how we prove who we are and what's coming next. AI, biometrics continuing to shape the future of identity verification. If that means not having to stumble around carrying my passport around for a beer in Utah or something like that, that's got to be a good thing. So just thank you for bringing this topic to life today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I think what stood out most from my conversation with Philipp today is how quickly digital identity has moved from a back-end compliance function to frontline business strategy. That is the big takeaway. And in a world where AI can fabricate a convincing persona in mere seconds, organisations now need more than just traditional checks. They need adaptive, intelligent systems that understand context, intent, and risk. And Philipp made it clear today, we're no longer just verifying users, we're defending trust. From onboarding flows to border security, digital identity now sits at the heart of how we interact, transact, and safeguard our data. And when implemented thoughtfully, the good news is it does more than just reduce fraud. It builds confidence, it accelerates customer acquisition, and keeps businesses compliant in shifting regulatory environments. So as we look to the future, how are you and your business preparing for the next wave of challenges that surround digital identity, especially when our Facebook feed could be a mixture of friends, contacts, and AI bots? And are your systems resilient enough to handle deepfakes, synthetic actors, and the growing role of AI? Or is it just time to rethink your approach? Let me know what you think. If you've seen digital identity make a difference in your organisation, if you've got a story to share, I want to hear it. techblogwriter@outlook.com, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, just at Neil C. Hughes. Let's keep sharing stories like this and we can all learn together. And on that note, it's time for me to get out of here. So I'll speak with you all again very soon. Thanks for listening today. Bye for now.